Hey guys, what's going on? It's Brandon. I'm out here in the garage. Figured I'd make a video real quick. So just a little bit more backstory. The first person to ever tell me about the brake control module being above all the other modules on the C7 was Chris Crawford. And for those of you who don't know, he's like one of the gods of the aftermarket community. He and they don't work together. They're actually competitors, heavy rivalry between the two guys. But Ben at Weapon X and Chris Crawford, to the best of my knowledge, were the two people who figured out how to tune the LT5 blower and put it onto like an LT4 engine, because that LT5 blower has an extra wastegate inside of it, it's an extra throttle body that bleeds off air to the atmosphere. So anyway, it's like a turbo controller, but for a supercharger. And a lot of people don't realize that. And most tuners who tune the LT5, they don't understand that you've got to close that down to make max power, and they're not doing that. They don't know what they're doing. So anyway, Chris Crawford is like God level. He's very intelligent. I used to talk to him a lot on the phone. And so long story short, with the C7, Crawford, and I think Ben at Weapon X also noticed it, but Crawford definitely noticed it. He was the first person to ever tell me about it. On the C7 Z06 even, when you would go to the drag strip and you would accelerate from a dig at the drag strip, the people were getting two distinct quarter-mile times. Very distinct, like one, I forget what it is, like 3 or 4 tenths faster than the other. And the 60 foots would change. And they couldn't figure out why. It could be the same night, same car, same driver, everything, and they get these two distinct times. You either fall in this category or this category. And they couldn't figure out why for a while. They finally figured it out. When you don't have your foot on the brake, when you launch the car, the brake control module does not interfere. But if you have your foot on the brake and then let go of the brake to launch the car, the brake control module interferes. So the brake control module has like ultimate override on everything. And so Chris Crawford was wanting to get into that because it's not visible in the ECU. And see, this is one of the things where I disagree with Andrew Zurich, for instance, which again, the other day I gave him a compliment. He was on track anyway about the ZR1 not needing to have SAE and standard correction to dyno so I give credit where credit's due, but I also call people out where I want to call them out. So Chris Crawford was the first person to basically tell me at the time that according to he and HP tuners and everybody that he talked to, they couldn't find it anywhere in the ECU programming to disable the brake pedal so that that close of throttle body wouldn't happen. So Ben at Weapon X and Chris Crawford are the two guys, genuinely, to the best of my knowledge, they were the first two. And they don't work together. So it's kind of like Tesla and Marconi both invented radio at the same time. They each say they invented it first, but it's fine to be the two guys who invented radio simultaneously. It's fine to be the first two guys who figured this out in the Corvette community. And this is information I've had in my belt since like 2018 to 2019. Like I've had this stuff for a long time, maybe even sooner than that. But the point is, by 2018 to 2019, I was well aware of all this stuff back in the C7 days. And so basically, in a conversation between Crawford and I on the phone, he basically was explaining, that he had asked around about getting into the brake control module from, GM insiders. And it's like a known fact amongst GM insiders that there's only 2 people who have access to the brake control module. And the reason why GM only gives it to those 2 people is because it's the most secretive code in the car. And so it can close down throttle body, it can do all these different things, and it's all hidden in there. Andrew at CSP, I've mentioned this to him before, he says I'm full of shit. Maybe he's changed his tune by now, but all I know is I've never seen anybody necessarily disable that on the C7 tune. Now, if it can be disabled, and HP Tuners has identified it because HP Tuners constantly figures out what more code means and how to access things and do things. That's fine. And by the way, we're talking about automatic C7Z06s and automatic C7Z01s. Okay, when you load the brake at the start line of the drag strip at the lights. So it's basically the car is protecting itself. And knows if you're giving it throttle and brake at the same time, you're about to do something like a drag race. So it actually limits your throttle body. And so the car doesn't make full power in the very beginning of the drag race. And I've had people argue this with me and shit. And meanwhile, there's other people who are professional drag racers who come out of the woodwork and they're like, I wonder what that was about. I figured it out too. That's awesome that somebody else knows about this. We all keep it secret because it's to our advantage, blah, blah, blah. Because, if people are racing for money, they don't want the other guy to know. If it's two C7Z06s against each other, they hope the other guy doesn't know the secret. But the point is, at the time, Chris Crawford really wanted into the brake control module, as did other people. Everybody wanted it in. What do you call it? The guy who designed the brake controller, Michael Levitas, who Jim Miro eventually copied his program and implemented something very similar on the 2018 and beyond C7s. Okay, that was because he copied the strategy done by Michael Levitas. Mike Levitas doesn't have access to the brake control module on the C8. So you got to understand, the C8 was being developed during the C7 times. Even during C6, it was being developed. But the point is definitely during C7. So once you understand that, GM had already made up their mind that only 2 people were going to have access to the brake control module code in, these later years when the C8's about to launch. So I'm just throwing out all kinds of interesting stuff for you guys to understand about how hard this brake control module is to get into, and also how hard it is to get into the transmission control module on these DCTs, because then you would be able to hypothetically change the EDIF program. And once again, it's the same moral as I ended the last video with, and the moral is, if all of a sudden the car starts spinning, people aren't going to admit that they got their program reprogrammed. They're either going to be dead when they spin at high speed, or they're going to live but just not brag that they changed the program. Okay, so it gives the C8 a bad reputation if the cars are spinning. So that's why General Motors went to Global B. Global B had to be developed before the C8 was launched. Again, it had nothing to do with the bankruptcy. It had to do with Global B. General Motors had to come out with a way to get the code to be totally encrypted. BMW had already figured it out. Boeing had already figured it out. Military applications had already figured it out. GM said, okay, if we're going to do this, and we're going to come out with these crazy programs on the C8, we've got to implement Global B. So that's why it had nothing to do with the bankruptcy. It had to do with timing. They had to develop Global B. And then once they had Global B developed, then they could release the C8, because now they felt confident that people weren't going to be able to get into the brake control module and the transmission control module. See ya.